Thanks very much, David. Could I please ask my panelists to come up to the stage? Can you hear me, by the way? My microphone is not seem to be... Is this better? Hello? Can you... Okay.
Make it easier for people.
If you can, yeah. Let me sit here, if it doesn't, that's okay. Thank you. The technical challenges as usual. Well, thank you. Europe has been on the far front of decarbonization, putting in place policies, legal and regulatory frameworks, and of course funding arrangements. Carbon management, together with other decarbonization options and technologies, has also been in focus. We had it featured in the Net Zero Industry Act, in the CRCF, which is coming to force. We have the Industrial Carbon Management Strategy released, and of course, lastly, in the Clean Industrial Deal. During this first panel discussion of the day, with our speakers that represent policymakers, industry, NGO, and civil society, we're going to dive into the state of play, what is coming down the line, and barriers that can impact progress. So I'm very pleased and honored to have with us today Christian Holzleitner, who is the head of unit for land economy and carbon removals with the European Commission. We have Frederick Payneau, he's the head of public affairs with Heidelberg Materials. We have Tobias Johan Sorensen with the Danish NGO Conchita, and of course, Eva Temme, who is the chair of the Zero Emissions Platform. So I will have a conversation with my esteemed panel speakers for around sort of 40 minutes, 45 minutes, and then we will get also questions from the audience. So as we're discussing, please, if you have any questions, just jot them in your mind, and you'll have an opportunity to ask them at the end of the session. Without further ado, if I can kick off with Christian. Christian, would you be able to give us a brief overview of the journey we have had so far with regards to carbon management, maybe starting with the Net Zero Industry Act, and as we discussed the CRCF, Industrial Carbon Management Strategy, etc. What have been the key milestones achieved?
Yes, good morning. We're working at all levels to get this new market established in Europe, and we're really looking at an integrated a CO2 market that works for CCS, that works for CCU, and that works for carbon removals. So we need to work on the capture, on the transport, on the storage. With the Net Zero Industrial Act, we've set the target of 50 million tons of storage of CO2 by 2030. The Industrial Carbon Management Strategy has really set out as this global view on how can we create this network industry, this new network industry that we need for climate neutrality. I think it's the other big network industry besides hydrogen that we need to establish. Then we are working on a very technical level with the certification of carbon removals. We have now since December 24 our certification framework for carbon removals and carbon farming entered into force. We're very busy developing the specific methodologies together with our expert group. Just last week, we sent out our new drafts for bio-CCS, DAX, and biochar, and now are eagerly awaiting the feedback for our expert group meeting on the 26th of March. We are also doing a lot on financing. So within the Innovation Fund, as you know, the Innovation Fund is financed by the revenues of the EU emission trading system. And I think we've spent up to now already 12 billion euros on first-of-a-kind projects. And around 40% of those projects are about CCS, carbon removals, and so on. And I think if all of these projects go ahead until 2030, we would capture, I think, more than 25 million tons of CO2. So there's like really a good investment, and we also see, I think, already quite some bankability in this project. Of course, we still need public support, We are working with the whole market also to ensure the storage. That's a bit challenging for the moment. Still, with our colleagues in DG Energy, we are working also on all the specifications for the transport. Yeah, so I think we are on a very good way here, but a lot of things to do, of course, to set up a new market.
Thank you so much for that overview. And you mentioned there are a lot of things still to do, but we're kind of certainly on the path, on the journey there. And with that, kind of looking forward, if I may turn to Eve, who's a very keen follower of policy and regulatory developments in Europe and beyond. Eve, when you look sort of forward to the, let's say, next sort of 18 or 24 months, what should we be watching out for? What should be in our diaries, particularly as it relates to Europe? What are you going to be watching out for?
Thank you, Lauren. I'm very happy to be here today representing the Zero Emissions Platform. Okay, here we are. Very happy to be here today representing the Zero Emissions Platform. And well, let me start with saying that we very much, first of all, welcome the Clean Industrial Deal and what it means, aligning the climate.
Sorry, cannot hear still? No, we can't hear.
Okay, I'll get the mic.
We thought by now we would have sorted this out, but yes.
Thank you. Is this better?
Yes.
Okay, so Plan B is working. And yet again, I'm very happy to be here today representing the Zero Emissions Platform. And the first thing I want to highlight is that we really, really welcome the Clean Industrial Deal and the fact that it aligns the climate ambition and the economic needs and the economic developments in the EU. That's sorely needed. And of course, for our community here, what it does is it's recognizing this whole industrial carbon management infrastructure as a critical pillar for achieving these two goals. Now, next 24 months are crucial. I will get into the policy developments soon, but I think we have to also highlight that these next 24 months are when we will see the first of a kind projects in Europe actually in operation. We're talking about Portus, we're talking about Northern Lights, and here with the industrial carbon management community, we have to do our best to get the word out on what it means, to communicate about it, to showcase these success stories that we are going to have, because this is going to be after so many years of if we leave out the Norwegian projects, really nothing happening. So huge development there. On the policy front, obviously, we have the implementation of existing policy tools, the Industrial Carbon Management Strategy, the Net Zero Industry Act, so also the Carbon Removal Certification Framework. These are happening, these are ongoing. With Zero Emissions Platform, we are very much contributing to this. We've done some very impactful workshops earlier this year, for example, on storage monitoring. I just had a conversation before this session where, again, I got really good feedback on what it means. So working with the Commission, working with the governments, doing the capacity building needed to get this, especially the Net Zero Industry Act, in place and working. And then we have the new policy initiatives that we are expecting. So there's the Industrial Decarbonization Accelerator Act that we are expecting later this year. This is big because it's the CCS so far has been mainly capitalizing on the ETS, whether from the Innovation Fund or all the tools around the CCFDs. But now we are really looking at building new revenue streams that are sorely needed for our industry. So through selling low carbon products. And of course, if this happens and it's only voluntary, it will not really have as much impact. But we really need governments to lead the way with procurement. We need to have measures in place so that selling these products that have been decarbonized, for example, with CCS, actually are valued in the market, and the market is being built around it. So very much looking forward to that. Of course, the CO2 regulatory framework will be a big milestone, and it will be led by DG Enner.
This is the transportation.
Yes, the transportation framework. On that, the big work will be around making sure that we will have access and fair tariffs when it comes to that, and that will be a big undertaking for sure. And of course, 2026 also will see the assessment from the Commission on the integration of permanent removals in the ETS, and we are yet to see how that looks like, but again, something that could have quite big implications. I'm just coming from Florence yesterday, where we had discussions around removals, and this part came up as well, and I kind of came here encouraged that the developments might be maybe even slightly swifter than we expect with a more conservative view. So let's see how that goes.
Thanks very much, Eva. And we'll certainly delve into some of the topics that you touched upon, including, for example, the EU ETS directive revision. But can I turn to Frederick and ask, we've heard from Christian the journey we've been on. We also heard from Eva what is potentially coming down the line. Now, Heidelberg Materials is a first mover in a hard-to-abate sector, kind of, or cement sector, which is not considered to be one of the more difficult sectors to decarbonize. From your point of view, are the existing policies and regulatory frameworks enough? And if they're not, what do you expect to see? What do you hope to see in the upcoming sort of developments that Eva outlined?
Great that you mentioned that that cement industry is a hard-to-abate industry because it gives definitely a precise perspective from the industry when it comes to CCS, and we all know that societal movement, economic movement, development will come from the regulatory. It will be definitely a big lever. That's what's happening so far with the CCS, and was what Christian mentioned. But this regulatory framework must enable the industry to go to the end of the journey that the industry, and specifically at Heidelberg Materials, we are developing. We have in our sector what we call the 5C roadmap. So we go through all the steps of the value chain, from the clinker production, cement production, concrete production, the construction using this concrete, and also what we call the carbonation at the end of the process. And this regulatory framework enable us to have levers and levies at each steps, which is really important for us because we can focus on CCS, but also on conventional measures in order to come at the end with the CCS for what is definitely needed for us. So we expect that this regulatory framework enable us to activate all these levers. That's for the general and the global perspective. Now, when it comes to CCS, some of the challenges have been already mentioned. What we do see definitely as a main challenge, there are two, I would say. The first is to bring the industry in a position to take FID, final investment decision, which is the key element. I was quite pleased to see all the developments in the introduction speech. Not all are at the FID, but the FID will be the key momentum to deploy the CCS. So it means that the regulatory framework must ease this momentum by giving more certainty on the longer term. We can go, and maybe we will go through them later on. But two elements for this momentum are definitely an easier access to financing. I use the term financing and not funding. Funding is one of the possibilities, but we have to be also creative. Creative when it comes to the development of business models, strategies. First, and secondly, more concretely, the development of an infrastructure. And I think it's, from the emitter perspective, point of view, it is a key element, because you will only take FID if you are sure that at a certain moment of time, after the capture of your CO2, you will be able to transport it. That's definitely key. And of course, being able to get stored. So for us, it's certainly at the Benelux level, our priority number one is the development of the infrastructure, and to give clear messages to the emitters that this infrastructure will be on place on due time for the early movers to go. And the cement industry is definitely, I think, one of, I would say, the natural early movers due to the quantity we have, due to the fact that it's an hard-to-abate sector, and due to the fact that because we are quite local, we have multiplied plants all over Europe, and aggregating those plants will enable to create clusters, I would say, that other industry with high emissions, but maybe lower than the cement industry, can benefit from.
Thanks very much, Frederick. And in fact, you mentioned financing. It's one of the key topics of the day today. After this, we'll have a panel discussion on it, and as well as a breakout session. And hopefully we may be able to touch upon it even in this panel in a little while. But if I can turn to Tobias as a representative of Concito, the Danish NGO, and of course a representative of the civil society. How do you expect or hope to see carbon management landscape develop in Europe over the next couple of years? And specifically, what role do you think civil society organizations can play in this process?
Great, thanks. And happy to be here, and happy to represent civil society, although I cannot speak on behalf of all. We are a climate think tank. We work on all things climate. We think CCS will play a big role in climate policy and emissions reductions, alongside rapid reductions, electrification in all sectors, and so on. On the policy landscape, we think we will need funding for CCS. In Europe, the ETS is not enough to do the job, at least for a number of years. But I think it's very clear that although we will have a lot of more public spending in the coming years, there will not be a cake for everyone to eat it also. So we will have to find out how to share the cake of public funding, and we advocate specifically for focusing on the hard-to-abate sectors and industries which are perhaps prone to leakage or more likely not to decarbonize with other options. So in the light of limited public funding, we need to prioritize this resource. We also start to see that in terms of carbon management, we think it should be increasingly focusing on storing carbon rather than utilizing it together with hydrogen, in terms of also limited public money, limited resources, using also hydrogen and electricity in sectors where they have the highest climate benefit. So I think the market should decide what to do with the CO2 and electricity, but we should not favor one solution over another with mandates, for example. And the role of civil society, I think, is very important, especially when it comes to transport and storing CO2. Some CO2 will be stored onshore. That is also a cheaper option in the long run, perhaps. We need to transport a lot of CO2 by pipelines. It comes closer to people. Yeah. And getting from PowerPoint to feed to FID and to actually doing a project and having a payback period of 10, 15 years, you need a broad political support. And therefore, I think having civil society organizations on board and also into the stuff is very important. In one of the places we are trying to do onshore storage in Denmark is seeing opposition. And it's probably easier for NGO or think tank to convince some skeptics that it's a good idea. If you're a big oil company, very good at drilling, your legitimacy in climate is perhaps not as high. So I think very important to broaden the support for CCS, but also focus on it.
I'll pick up on the topic of transportation. I was thinking we have sort of discussed a few topics that we would like to pick up on, but transportation, given that Frederick mentioned, for an emitter, it needs to be transport and storage, the infrastructure needs to be in place, and as you mentioned, Tobias, it's going to kind of come near people's homes, and of course, Eva mentioned, we're looking forward to the regulatory package in 2026. So perhaps, Christian, maybe if I can start, I mean, what do you hope to see in the transportation regulatory package? What do you think, what issues do you think we need to address in Europe for the transportation, both for point source, but also for CDR to be, be that enabler that's needed?
No, I think it's a lot about the specifications, that we have a seamless regulation from the capture over the transport to the storage. And I think what is also very important to keep in mind, the transport network will be for every kind of CO2, be it fossil, biogenic, captured from the air. So we really have to see this, I think, also very much as a community effort. So it's not CCS versus removals or BECS versus DACs or whatever, or versus CCU. This is really, we need for every kind of industrial carbon management, we need the transport network. And we need a different types of transport, which we need to understand still better, from rail, over shipping to pipelines. And it will be different solutions depending on the location of the plants. So you think, for example, about Finland and Sweden, and you think about the pulp and paper mills that are there. They already have a very good connection, even if they are like a little bit in the forest, they have already a very good connection to the rail network, because they've already been transporting the timber, the trees there. So there will be a different solution than if we talk about the big industrial hubs in Rotterdam or in Antwerp. And I think there's also a big role to play for our member states to also get all the permitting right. In several places, it will be possible to repurpose existing gas networks. Like that we would have a gas, hydrogen, and CO2 pipeline quite close to each other to have the infrastructure there. And of course, you need the strong signals from, okay, there will be the CO2 captured, and there will be the storage site, so that we really have a good competition at every level, from capture over transport to the storage sites, and need to work on all these three levels.
Thank you. Eva, Frederick, anything that you would like to add?
Of course, there's a lot to add when we are discussing transport. If you look at Europe, and if you can imagine that large companies like Heidelberg, but there are others, we have to face with different geographical conditions, of course. But the key is to find the most cost-efficient way to transport it to the storage site. So it's good that we hear in several member states there are reflection for onshore storage besides the offshore storage. So we have to take it all into consideration, and maybe you will have the chance to have a storage size 25 kilometers far from the plant. But definitely we do not expect to have it. If we take one concrete example, we do not expect it to have it to have such a situation here in the Benelux. So the main message that we are delivering is, let's be cost efficient, and when you consider the huge amounts of aggregated, even per one plant, or aggregated, the most efficient way for us to transport CO2 is having a direct pipeline going from source to sink, definitely. If you imagine, and every one of you has already heard about cost of the value chain, I can tell you that within Heidelberg we have different settings, and sometimes the difference in cost between, in terms of value chain, I don't talk about production, but in terms of value chain, if you take the most efficient cost of the value chain versus one would be complicated because you have to liquefy it, you have to transport by train, then you have to retreat and then hub, etc., etc. It could mean an increase in the cost of 60 to 70% of the cost of the value chain that comes on top of the cost of the production, and we are dealing with a commodity. I know that for some sectors, industrial sectors, the cost of this value chain can mean an increase of 15 to 20% of the production cost. For the cement industry, it could lead to an increase of 60, 70, even 100%, which is unaffordable. So definitely, what we are calling is to have an approach which enables the creation of situation, let's call it cluster or whatever, situation where you can bring critical mass in order to definitely benefit from a scale economy when it comes to pipeline from source to sink.
Thank you.
That's key for us.
Anything to add, Ava, from your point of view?
So I think from what hasn't been mentioned yet, what we see with the work with our members is we know that some entities might like to see a bit less regulation in the beginning or more flexibility in the legislative framework for the CO2 transport in the beginning. So the question is how to build it in. But at the same time, it's also, when we look at the reality, when we look at the pipelines, which are, as Fredrik mentioned, the most efficient way of transporting CO2, in practice, we also, and Commission will have to seriously consider the emergence of natural monopolies, because there's going to be one entity that owns that infrastructure in a particular place, and then of course then what it means for all the other stakeholders who are involved. But in fact, we see countries like Denmark and Belgium already taking steps to regulate the transport in their own territory, and given that we have so many projects coming up that are cross-border, we really, really need an EU-level solution here, and we need it in place as soon as possible.
Yep. So it's the EU-level framework that's needed urgently, whilst kind of countries are starting to develop their own, obviously, but it's a matter of speed versus some of the kind of hard issues to tackle. So it's going to be, I guess.
It will be a challenge to make it work, but we just all need to collaborate and make it work as the member states are building their own and as the EU is putting in place the rules.
Yeah. So if we may come back to we discussed sort of financing, funding, EU ETS not being enough, come to the EU ETS revision that we're expecting, which is a big topic in itself. But maybe if I can start with Christian, what key issues related to carbon management do you wish to, or do you think needs to be addressed? And I know you're an interested part in this, but in the EU ETS revision, and also I think several in the panel would also like to opine on reductions versus removals. We know that, is it the inclusion of CDR in EU ETS the best path, the best way to follow?
As I've already said several times, it's about getting the incentives right, both for CCU and CCS. So, we need to present the one who captures the carbon, the right incentives. Okay, do I want to store a certain amount of that? Do I want to resell it for reuse, or I reuse it myself? And both for the removals as well as for CCU, we don't have yet the right incentives in the ETS. So we need to create these business cases. Well, for classic CCS, we have the business case. The second question is, of course, the financing. Will the ETS price on its own be sufficient to drive those investments? And what we see now, what we expect, probably not. So this is why in the Clean Industrial Deal, as Eva already said, we are proposing this decarbonization bank with a volume of 100 billion euros to finance these carbon contracts for difference, so that we pay the difference between the ETS price and the cost, and that we do that European-wide so that we can really quickly drive down the costs and also use the public money very efficiently. Due to the geopolitical situation we are in, there will be quite pressure on all the public budgets. So we really need to target the use and make it as efficient as possible. Despite some also good news, like if you see in Germany, they put now the climate neutrality for 2045 into the constitution and can provide there quite a lot of financing. So, but the efficient use of money, of public money, will be a big topic. So, I think we need to look at both creating the right incentives for CCU and CCS, carbon removals, in the emission trading system, and then providing the additional finance through carbon contracts for difference to start up the sector at a bigger scale.
Tobias, this is a topic that I believe Conchita has put out a report on. What are your opinions on the topic?
So, on a possible integration of removals in the European emission trading system, some colleagues of mine, together with the NGO Clean Air Task Force, put out a report end of last year, which I encourage everybody to read, which highlight if we are going to integrate permanent carbon removals in the ETS, there are some things to be aware of, and we call it a balancing act. So it's not just something that is easy done. I don't think anyone expects that, but first of all, we need to maintain the integrity of the ETS, and it needs to create incentives to keep reducing emissions towards 2040. And when phasing in permanent carbon removals, the price will likely not be enough to secure most types of permanent CDR, especially direct air carbon capture and storage. So we also need supporting mechanisms. And we also need to be aware of that sustainable biomass is a limited resource that we need to take care of and use in sectors that may not have any other options. And carbon removals can also come from using bioenergy in cement, for example. It does not only have to be in heat and power, as we do today. So there are also ways to get carbon removals from hard-to-abate sectors. And I hope that is also something that we look into in the future. Last week we also published a paper on comparing carbon-based e-fuels and permanent geological storage. And we have one key ask that is including direct air capture and storage as a solution to decarbonize aviation alongside carbon-based e-fuels, because we actually think it's a more resource-efficient way to decarbonize air travel. We will let the market decide, but we need more options to decarbonize air travel, and we need more funding to capture CO2 directly from the air. As I think many people are aware of, we have limited land that we want to use for a lot of things. We have limited sustainable biomass, and we need a lot of carbon removals. So we also need to scale up more solutions to capture CO2 from the air.
Thank you. Is there anything that's not been touched upon, and anything that you would hope to see in the EU ETS revision? I guess as the chair of ZEP hat on, but of course as an expert too, I'm interested both if you're able to comment.
So yes, here as a chair of ZEP, full disclosure, we don't have an elaborate position in ZEP on this topic yet, but it's very obvious that many stakeholders want to see a more closer way for removals to play a role in the ETS compared to what there is now, and closer because through Innovation Fund removals already are getting funding from the ETS, but obviously there is need for more. Well, what hasn't been said, but it's stating the obvious, we do have the ETS that will for stationary installations go to zero in 2039, and for aircraft operators 2045. So we do know that something needs to change, because those emissions, there will still be some left, right? And we need to tackle that. and bringing in removals just to help to increase the liquidity and decrease volatility is one of the arguments that constantly is popping up. At the same time, on the other side, if you look at it, removal industry is looking at ETS as a potential revenue source. Now, we're discussing it here also a lot from the regular CCS perspective, and as Christian mentioned really well in the beginning, the fact that there is an ETS doesn't mean that that this carbon price automatically will make something happen. We have had CCS covered by the ETS for a very, very long time, but we are only starting to seeing projects, taking off, recently, and finally there's a larger round of FRDs that's happening. So just the fact that you can benefit on the ETS carbon price doesn't necessarily make the projects happen. So the question here is, how do we bring in removals in a way that it actually makes the difference, and how to do it in a way that also keeps the integrity of the ETS in place, because we've built the system over the last 20 years. It's working well. Safeguarding the fact that it is working well has to come first, and then everything else that we add to it has to be very, very carefully calibrated. And as ZEP, we are contributing to this work, also to the CRCF work through the expert group, and very much looking to contribute to this conversation as it's evolving.
And I think I would like to highlight your point about integrity, that we've built a system that's functioning well and don't want to mess up with it in that sense. If I can change gears a little bit and turn to Frederick, and a topic that we haven't touched upon but I think is important, particularly for your industry, is CBAM. Now, what's your view? Are you pleased to see this simplification, the review of CBAM planned by the Commission? Is this a welcome move, and what can how can CCS support the industry within the kind of CBAM context?
It's a wide question. But to start answering it, I would get one step back on the ETS. I was talking about the certainty of the regulatory framework. This certainty put an ultimatum to our industry with a total phase out of these free allowances by 2034. So definitely that's an horizon that we have, and for which we have to find strategies. When it comes to deployment of CCS and then financing, one message that we are delivering is to allocate more of the ETS to the project, certainly for the early movers. It's not the case for every country, definitely, but when we are looking at the case of Belgium, for instance, the proportion of this ETS revenue that are dedicated to actions for the industry who had to decarbonize are too low. Is too low first, and secondly, we are also as a cement industry calling for not so much for innovation fund, but for transition fund, and deployment fund, and this could be definitely finance a lot with the ETS revenue. I think that if I'm not wrong, we expect from the cement industry a contribution by 2033, 34, I think of 80 to 100 billion euro. So it will be huge contribution that we need to use. Based on this, if we are facing the phase out of our free allowances, and if we have to bear the cost of the CCS, we definitely are in need of this CBAM adjustment mechanism to avoid, let's call it the right word, some discrepancy on the market. That's what we need to avoid. That's why we are first quite happy that the CBAM deployment has not been postponed. First, Secondly, we definitely call for watertight system. Otherwise, some will have occasion for evasion and fraud, and that's definitely what we want to avoid. Of course, we need to have more precise definition and approach in order to be certain that there won't be no circumvention to this system. But definitely, that's a system we are calling for. And when we were calling for collaboration between the industry and governments, etc., I would add collaboration between member states through the customs, but not only, of course. Now we know that there are some criticism about the CBAM, or some skepticism, definitely. But okay, we have to start something anyhow. Otherwise we will face an unfair competition that we won't be able to survive definitely in Europe.
Thank you. And I'm cognizant of time, and I would like to open up to questions from the audience, but I think, one question for Tobias. And we talked about, Fredrik, you mentioned collaboration. I think one of the issues that we always discuss here is stakeholder engagement, public engagement in particular. And Denmark has been on the far front of CCS deployment, achieved a lot in a relatively short period of time. Licenses now got onshore licenses for storage as well. License, I think, maybe not licenses, but at least one license. What are the lessons learned from the Denmark experience from your point of view?
Yeah, so I'm happy to take credit for Denmark being a front runner on CCS, but I think one lesson is that we need to thank the hardworking people and civil servants and the ministries and the agencies for actually making this happen. It's a lot of work in planning and maturing this market, and we also had an industry that was leaning and is leaning into this with the big risks. Although there are incentives, it's not a pure play. And I think on the critical side, I think we may have underestimated the NIMBY, not in my backyard, not anything in my backyard, which we are seeing some opposition in one area where we have an exploration license for onshore storage. I think we have some learnings from this that other countries might could learn something from, but also that this local support in civil society and capacity building in on all levels of society is very important, because we need support, and we need support for a long time for many projects to happen. Then we need to be careful. The politicians, civil servants, industry need to be careful what they promise each other. Denmark has, in theory, a very good underground for storing CO2, but how much is it in the end? How much can we store? I mean, we had some very high estimates in the beginning, and maybe it's a little bit less. We'll see. But we also be careful not to hype this too much. Also, in terms of what can we deliver when, in terms of capturing CO2 to achieve climate targets in a specific year. It takes time, and I think the learning curves have been steep for all of us working in Denmark. Hopefully there's something to be shared there. And last, CCS is of no surprise to many in here, I think, high capex. When you build this thing, you need to run it. When you have the transport infrastructure, you would like to use it. So even though we would like CCS to be very flexible and cheap, it is not, and it may not be for a number of years. And that comes to my first point, that we cannot, at least for a number of years, all have a cake and eat it too. So let's try to focus CCS a little bit. And although I'm advocating for the perfect world, and in reality, the world is not perfect, so I'm aware of that, but we are planning some big funding schemes now, and then let's get the most out of them.
Thank you very much, Tobias. With that, can I turn to the audience and see if you have any questions? Maybe I can take a couple to start with. If you could say your name and your affiliation, please. So we have one, yes, over there, please. You want to? Yes. Okay.
Rachel Moore, Carbstrat. Thanks to the panel for a really great discussion. A question I have is, what kind of market are we planning to develop? Is CO2 a commodity, or is it a waste that is able to be commoditized in some cases? Because that comes down to these fundamental questions about financing, about integration into the EU ETS and export models, et cetera.
Thank you, Rachel. Excellent question. Is it a commodity or is it a waste product? Any other questions? There's one at the front. Here, the lady. Yeah. Not working. No, don't.
Hi, good morning. I hope you all can hear me now. Yeah. So my name is Kalyani, and I am an independent consultant working in the carbon offset and ESG space for a couple of years now. So my question to you is, from my client's perspective on the CBAM especially, I would like to know how the carbon CCS in the proposed carbon border adjustment management and the need to ensure that the treatment of CCS in the CBAM is consistent with the EU emissions trading system, and what needs to be done to promote a level playing field. Thank you.
Thank you. So 2 questions, one on CO2, whether it's a commodity or waste, and the second one is on CBAM and kind of how CCS within CBAM is in sync with the EU ETS. So any volunteers from my panel? Eva?
Yes, mic is working. Great to have all the independent experts asking good questions. I'll take the first one, CO2, commodity or waste. It's a question that comes up, I think, a lot, and basically it depends on which bubble you're having the conversation. The conversation might take one direction or the other, but in practice, we're just going to do everything it takes to get rid of CO2 either from the smoke tax or from the atmosphere. And that means that if commoditizing it helps through CCU, we'll be doubling down on that. And where managing it as waste makes sense. For example, the European Scientific Advisory Board recently suggested extended emitter responsibility. Any solutions where tackling it as a waste delivers, we will use that. So we will use everything, both commodifying, tackling it as waste, anything else that works, like across the board, because in the end of the day, we're just trying to find a solution to this problem.
Whatever works.
Whatever works.
Christian.
I mean, we should be going very much 2040, 2050 into a circular economy. Of course, the management of waste streams will be super important. So I don't know whether there's even like a difference between the two, because we must get much better in using all the residues that we have, because they will be the feedstocks. Although if we think also again geopolitically about the resilience of our supply chains, it's about, in particular I think in the bioeconomy, there's still such a large potential how we can better use the residues from growing the feedstock, overusing it until we dispose it at the end. So I think there will be kind really of a new economy.
Yes, I think we have all 3. So Frederick, and then Tobias, and then Eva wants to have a little add. Yes.
Yeah, I would like to comment on this as well. In the cement industry, our purpose is to bring cement on the market. So definitely we bring a product first, and we are considering the CO2 as being part of the characteristics of this product. And if there is no CO2, that's a specific characteristic. Now, if you add to that the fact that we are definitely engaged in, as Christian mentioned, in a circular economy, However, I come from the waste recycling sector. I don't think it's the right. I understand perfectly the question, but I don't think it's the right way to address it. For several reasons, and one of the reasons is that if you need to increase the public acceptance on the CCS, please avoid to tell that you are sorting a waste that you will store somewhere, because I can tell you, I face it every day. I can tell you that there are people comparing the storage of CO2 waste with the disposal or the landfilling of nuclear waste or that kind of stuff. And that's definitely something that we want to avoid. That's not really. Now, to conclude on this, behind this question, I also understand the fact that there are different challenges, and definitely when it comes to CCS technology, you have to deal with affluence, you have to deal with risk, you have to deal with a couple of technical elements that could bring questions to the people, because you have to treat your gases, etc., etc. But definitely, let's not see it as a waste. At a minimum, in a circular economy approach.
Tobias?
Yes, so right now we are treating the atmosphere as a big waste bin for CO2 and cooking the planet. So in a way, I think it is waste now. It's just ending up in the wrong place. In CCU, CCS, I think we should just align incentives. So compensating for the climate benefit that it has, and not over-incentivizing one solution over another. Let them compete, and then let the market decide. Using CO2 to displace fossil fuels in CCU has the same climate benefit as storing a ton of CO2. Storing a ton of CO2 may have the climate benefit that it uses significantly less resources and energy. So we believe it will be more competitive, but be my guess that let the market decide. And I grew up a few hundred meters away from the only Danish nuclear waste facility. I didn't know until a few years ago. And now my family is building a camping on top of potentially one of the largest onshore storage facility in Europe. And I think in 15 years' time, nobody will notice. But while we are trying to make it happen, people are well aware. But when it's there, I think it's going to be okay to have some CO2 that is being wasted in the name of the climate.
I think that's a very good point. When we sort of start seeing more facilities up and operational, it's going to help on so many number of different fronts, including kind of concerns around safety, etc. We'll hopefully kind of forget about it, that it exists there. But Eva, you had some final points, I think.
Yes, so trying to make this panel discussion a bit more spicy. We don't always need to agree with each other, right? So when Christian says that, well, commodity waste is kind of the same, I would say it is very different, and we need to be intentional where and what we are going to do, whether we go both ways or we choose one or the other. Because if you look at how you build a business case for one or the other, it looks very different. The arguments when you go to finance the project are going to look very different. Probably the policy tools are going to look different, and challenging. Even, for example, if you look at carbon markets and what is the status of carbon credits, for example, in different countries, what kind of financial instrument that is actually different. It's not the same. So hopefully in the EU context we'll have more harmonization on what we do with CO2 and how we intend to go about it.
Thank you. It's always good to have sort of different views. That's why we have a panel. But any final questions? Maybe one more question from the audience. There's a question at the front, if I may. Actually, we can take 1 and 2. I think we might, if we're quick, kind of to answer.
Jean-Luc Reboul from ArcelorMittal. About the future storage of bio-CO2, how do you think Europe will evolve? Will it be recognized through ETS and negative emission in ETS, or through CDR credit? So how will it evolve in your mind?
Future of bio-CO2 storage. And there's a question also behind.
One question regarding the decarbonization bank. You mentioned that this will finance also CCFDs. Do you have more details about how this will function? could those funding go directly to a national mechanism, or it will be the project auction tendering in a European level? And the second question about the storage.
Sorry, we have only time for one, I think.
Ah, okay.
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 Any volunteers for the questions? Storage of or the outlook for bio-CO2, and I think CCFDs and funding was a bigger kind of, I think, question around how it's going to work, which might be part of our financing panel. But if anybody wants to kind of comment on the use of, I think the use of CCFDs and how they're going to be implemented. So any takers, please.
On the CCFD, I think we have the ambition to create a European lead market for that and not have 27 different types of carbon contracts for different. So we already have the very good experience with the Hydrogen Bank, or where we also see that member states are joining us in making one single European call, and where we as the Commission do all the administration and invite member states to also put their money there. So I think this is something we are clearly inspired, then also for the Decarbonization Bank. So this is also why we called it a bank.
Thank you, Christian. And Eva, you said you could comment on the first question.
Yes, on the first one, so bio-CO2, should it come in the ETS as a covered activity or through credits, potentially through CRCF? Well, the reality is, if we look at where the CRCF is going, it kind of implies that the credit path seems more on the table today. I have heard policymakers also mention the idea of coverage as an activity. So I think if you follow the public discourse, it looks like the credit option is the likelier outcome, but I'm not sure if activity is completely off the table. I don't know if anyone wants to confirm or deny, but that's how I understand things.
Thank you.
One comment on the decarbonization bank.
Sure.
It was quite positively seen by the sector, and definitely we even regret that it wouldn't start earlier, I would say. We do not know how it will start and develop. What we expect is that, given the fact that we can expect that the decision of this decarbonization bank will be based on certain criteria or KPIs, or call it whatever you want, that there will be some kind of sectoral approach, just to take into consideration that the cost efficiency in one sector cannot be the cost efficiency in another sector. So if it relies on, I don't know, wide bidding mechanism, somehow there must be criteria that makes specificities of sectors really important in order to avoid, once again, unfair competition between sector. Whatever we are, it's in favor of the cement sector or not in favor of the cement sector. It's just a position that we want to have this approach in the decarbonization bank.
Thank you very much. And I just want to, before bringing this to close, want to turn to my panelists and sort of ask if you have any final words, any final thoughts that you would like to share. Completely fine if you don't, but just wanted to give the opportunity.
I'm happy to volunteer. I think I want to leave you with 3 thoughts that we should see more of to make our industrial carbon management a success. We need to see more collaboration between also competitors to share the information, to share the knowledge. We need to bring in more different stakeholders that can help to de-risk projects, because this is becoming a huge bottleneck. And we should not be afraid of sharing what has gone wrong. We've seen great examples of that in the past. Just this morning I had a conversation with a gentleman who used to work on a road project which now is basically where the Portos project emerged. So there's a lot of that, and we should build on that. And a little nuggets of information to leave you with is also that at Zero Emissions Platform we are about to release our very exciting new branding, the whole new renewed zero emissions platform. So it will happen sometime later this week. So stay tuned. We'll keep you informed.
Tobias?
Yes. So maybe just rephrase some of my main points, so hopefully all remember. We're just encouraged to focus funding on and maybe lobby for funding for most needed sectors, and try not to disturb the market too much in terms of demanding CO2 to go to a specific resource, and let you and utilization and storage compete on market terms. And then on less market terms, we need to scale carbon removals, also those that are not bio-based, so especially direct air capture. We believe that is an important part to get going with. Also need some competition there, but also specific funding.
Yes. 2 words, CCS is a way to achieve carbon neutrality for our sector. It's not a goal in itself, I would say, because at the end, what we aim for is produce carbon neutral and bring lower carbon product on the market for the benefit of all. So let's keep that in mind. And secondly, just a message given to Christian on his first intervention. Correct me if I'm wrong, you told us that so far the Innovation Fund, the aggregate amount of captured CO2 expected is around 25 million ton. You aim for 50 million ton by 2030. I know people who are ready to to bridge the gap to the 50.
No, I think it's very encouraging to see overall the big interest in the Innovation Fund, both on CCS, CCU, carbon removal. So we also have now 2 carbon removal projects. And again, I think I want to emphasize this all goes together. This is a shared infrastructure, it's a shared market, it's a shared value chain. It's not one type against the other. And now that Eve also made her promotion, I also do a bit of promotion more on carbon removals, on permanent removals. We will do an event probably 21st of May, on private financing of permanent removals. So we talked a lot about DTS, but we also see, like for example, that there is also the demand from the voluntary carbon market, from some very big corporates who are interested into investing, that we see interest from the financial institutions, both public, private, to build up a portfolio of carbon removals. And so we want to discuss maybe the opportunities of a European buyers club, a little bit like what Frontiers in the US. So we want to see the interest and test the water. So we'll do a workshop on that on 21st of May.
And everybody's invited in this room.
Definitely for watching it on the web.
On that note, could I please ask for a round of applause for our speakers? Thank you. And now we have a coffee break. So if we could take around half an hour and maybe aim to be here latest by 11:15, please. Thank you.